Welcome to the ninth module and the ninth and last lecture of this course on technology and the psyche. For this module, the main assignment is to watch the 1982 film Blade Runner in either the director's cut or the final cut. I'll go into that in a bit. And Blade Runner is based on the Philip K. Dick novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Or should we say it's loosely based upon it. Philip K. Dick lived from 1928 to 1982. He published 44 novels in his lifetime, a tremendous number, most of which were science fiction. Since his death, his reputation has continued to grow. In 2007, he became the first science fiction writer to be included in the Library of America series, which is kind of like the literary equivalent of being canonized as a saint. His first really great novel was The Man in the High Castle, which won the Hugo Award for Best Science Fiction Novel in 1963. This is an alternate history in which the Axis powers of Germany and Japan had won World War II and divided America between them. At this point, this is a premise that seems really familiar and almost trite. At the time, it was anything but, and I think if you read the book, you'll be surprised at the subtlety which with this premise is handled. In the mid-60s, he'd go on to write some of his greatest novels, including Martian Time Slip and The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, as well as Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which I don't consider one of his greatest novels, but was certainly adapted into a great film in Blade Runner. Many of his novels have what you might call Gnostic themes. How can we know what is real and what is not? And that theme is extended with the theme of the android, which is defined as a robot or synthetic organism designed to look and act like a human and with a body that resembles a human's. The question being very definitely in Blade Runner, is there a point when we'll be unable to tell the difference between an android, which is a piece of technology, and a human being, or is there something ineffable such as a psyche or soul or emotionality that will ever distinguish one from the other? This is the question brought up in the famous Turing test, which was created in a paper by British cyberneticist Alan Turing in 1950. It's a test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. If you put a human and a machine behind separate curtains and ask them the same questions, and you as a judge are unable to distinguish which is the human and which is the machine, then the machine is said to have passed the test. And in fact, a Turing test, under a different name, plays a very important role in Blade Runner. Both robots and androids have a very distinguished history in science fiction films. In Fritz Lang's silent science fiction masterpiece, Metropolis, this robot is turned into this android, the so-called false Maria, meant to counteract what the ruling class feels is the pernicious influence of the true Maria, who is a kind of prophetess among the downtrodden masses. Androids have a distinguished history as science fiction villains. Think of the Borg. And also this character, played by Ian Holm in Alien, an earlier film of Ridley Scott, who also directed Blade Runner, who is revealed as a fifth columnist whose job is actually to preserve rather than take the life of the alien, one of the most terrifying monsters in any film. Philip Dick had a fascinating and ultimately tragic later life. On February the 10th, 1974, He was recovering from the effects of the extraction of an impacted wisdom tooth. A young lady from a pharmacy came to his apartment to deliver some medication. She was a Christian and had the Christian fish symbol on a necklace around her neck. And this impacted Philip Dick so much that throughout the next 2 months he experienced a series of Gnostic hallucinations. He claimed that he began to live a double life, one as himself and one as Thomas, a Christian persecuted by Romans in the 1st century AD. Out of this experience came what's arguably Dick's greatest novel, Valis, certainly the most bizarre of his novels, which is saying a lot. And he also documented his Gnostic experiences in a private journal that ran to thousands of pages, parts of which were published under the title of the Exegesis. He died in March the 2nd, 1982, from the effects of a series of strokes. This was not a man who took very good care of his health. Dick spent most of his life as a writer in near poverty. However, after his death, his books became more and more popular and better known, and some of them have been turned into popular movies, such as Total Recall, Minority Report, and this film, A Scanner Darkly, which was made by the director Richard Linklater. Blade Runner was released in 1982, just 4 months after Philip Dick died. The original included some voiceover narration that apparently the studio had insisted on, and was not an immediate popular or critical success. The film was directed by this gentleman, Ridley Scott, who's responsible also not only for Alien, but Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, and a number of other excellent films. In 1992, his director's cut was released in both theaters and for home video. This removed the voiceover narration and made a couple of other changes to the studio cut. And then in 2007, a final cut over which Ridley Scott had worked more intensively was released for home video. The film differs significantly from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel on which it is loosely based. In the book, the protagonist Deckard is still a Blade Runner charged with getting rid of unwanted androids. But in the book, he's also married. There isn't a lot of the subplot, or indeed any of the subplot with the female lead, Sean Young. There's a lot of emphasis on animal extinction in the book that's only somewhat hinted at in the film. And also the location has been changed from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I believe that one of the reasons for this is that Los Angeles is actually the classic background or setting for film noir, which are the tough, usually black and white crime dramas made after the Second World War in the late 40s and early 50s. Here's Fred McMurray in Billy Wilder's film noir classic Double Indemnity, and of course you'll notice the shadows from the Venetian blinds, and in Blade Runner you'll notice many shots with a similar visual component. In film noir also, the female lead is generally a double-crossing femme fatale who manages to wind the ostensibly big and strong male protagonist around her little figure, much to his shock and detriment. This is Barbara Stanwyck playing that role in Double Indemnity. Here is Sean Young, who even has a 40s hairdo, playing a comparable role in Blade Runner, that of Rachel, whom we find out early on is actually an android of a new type who is closer to a human being than previous models, bringing up the question, which is repeated in many different forms throughout the movie, of when does a so-called android cease to be a piece of technology and become a human being, someone with what we call a psyche or a soul. The film also makes extensive use of a couple of very famous Los Angeles locations, the first of which is the Ennis House, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and in 1923 and built the following year. This serves as the location both for the corporate headquarters of the mysterious Tyrell Corporation, which is responsible for making the androids, and also as the background of the protagonist Deckard's apartment. Another such location is the Bradbury Office Building in downtown Los Angeles, which dates from 1893, and which serves as the background for the film's conclusion or denouement. It's also where the apartment of a toy maker or doll maker who is in his day job an android programmer or programmer for androids. And this character befriends unknowingly one of the androids, Pris, who's played by Daryl Hannah. The Bradbury building also served as the background for the denouement of a classic film noir from 1950, DOA, or Dead on Arrival. So really, Blade Runner represents a science fiction twist on the film noir background and themes. Blade Runner is also notable for its beautiful art direction, and such artists as Lawrence Paul, who worked on Back to the Future, and Douglas Trumbull, who worked on 2001, which is of course pictured here, were among the contributors to the film's look. It's worth noting that as a 1982 picture, similarly to 2001, which came out in 1968, there are no computer graphics or digital compositing sequences in Blade Runner. All of the effects are mechanical and photographic, done with the use of models and so on. Something called the Voight-Kampff test is used in the film to distinguish androids from humans by measuring the level of their empathetic or emotional response. This, as previously mentioned, is based on the Turing test. You see here an interrogator using a machine to administer the test. This fellow looks awfully like Fred McMurray in Double Indemnity. Meanwhile, with newer and newer models of androids, or replicants as they are called, the distinction becomes harder and harder to make. This is basically the climax of the film, in which our protagonist Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, gets into a final battle with the chief or head android, the android leader, played by Rutger Hauer. And as I think you'll find when you see the film, either for the first time or again, a very intriguing job is done of blurring the distinction at this point between protagonist and antagonist, human and machine. This is an earlier scene that takes place in the apartment of the doll maker, whom Pris, one of the female androids, befriends. Here she is trying to hide her true identity by pretending to be one of the doll maker's dolls. I've always found this subplot and the character of the doll maker really intriguing, almost an element from another movie or story, although it does fit in very, very well to Blade Runner. I think the doll makers always reminded me of Drosselmeyer, who is the doll maker in The Nutcracker, which is based on a short story, 19th century short story by the German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann. So while I was watching this sequence during watching the film in preparation for doing this lecture, a little light came on in my head, and I thought of Heinrich von Kleist's short philosophical essay on the marionette theater, or über das Marionettentheater, from the early 19th century, which I first encountered in graduate school and which made quite an impression on me. So I've asked you to read this four-page essay by Kleist because I think that it and Blade Runner are mutually illuminating, and certainly both deal with the subject of technology and the psyche in a fascinating, if inconclusive way. Kleist lived from 1777 to 1811. He lived all over the place, but mainly in Berlin and the surrounding area. He died young and very romantically in a suicide pact with a terminally ill woman with whom he had fallen in love. He's best known as a playwright and a short story writer. He's not quite as well known in the English-speaking world, but some of his stories, such as Michael Kohlhaas, Die Marquise von O, the Marquisa of O, Saint Cecilia, or The Power of Music, are extremely well known and really masterpieces. In this essay, which reads like a short story, although it doesn't have a plot per se, the author, narrator, presumably Kleist himself, encounters a friend who is an artist, that is a well-known dancer. They begin talking about marionettes or puppets, and you might substitute android or replicant for marionette here. And the dancer asserts in a kind of contrarian, ironic fashion that, in fact, marionettes possess a grace that human dancers do not. He says that their soul, or Seele in German, is contained in their physical center of gravity, so it is impossible for them to be guilty of the sort of affectation that human dancers are often capable of. In other words, the technology of creating marionettes invests them with a soul that in certain critical ways is actually more authentic than the so-called human soul. Clearly, the dancer is somewhat of a Hermes figure who is prone to paradoxes. However, the dancer brings up the third chapter of Genesis, which describes the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And he says that human affectation is unavoidable now that we've eaten of the tree of knowledge. But paradise is locked and bolted, and the cherubim stands behind us. And then he says, I've got to quote the German here because it's so exquisite, wir müssen die Reise die Welt machen und sehen, ob es vielleicht von hinten irgendwo wieder offen ist. Which means we have to make a trip around the world and see if paradise is perhaps has been opened up again somewhere in the back. That is to say, the puppets in some way are more divine than we are, and we have to take the journey, as T.S. Eliot put it, that leads us to where we started, so we can see the place for the first time, in order to move through this awkward intermediate phase and gnostically become once again the divinity who we actually are.